Welcome back to the VET S.O.S podcast brought to you by the Who You Know Network. We're proud members of the Parade Deck community as well. Remember, don't drown the sea of transition. Grab the VET S.O.S Lifeline. We can now be heard on Reach Across America Radio, Thursdays at 4 p.m. Eastern. You can find Reach Across America Radio on iHeartRadio, Odyssey, and the TuneIn app. Today we have Cheryl Cross with us. Cheryl is here to tell us about all the work she's doing to help transitioning service members with their transition, as well as tell us about her amazing podcast and what she's doing with that. A lot of great things happening. Can't wait to jump into that conversation. Mark, you're still here. What's going on? How you doing?
I am, Sean. Thanks for having me back. It's been maybe a year, I think. Since I've been involved or been on screen at least. So super excited to be back and super excited to hear from Cheryl and chat with you guys again.
Yep, just living proof that what I say is true. You know, we got this VET S.O.S family thing going. People are still hanging around, helping us in the background, being advisors and stepping in when we need them. And Keith's out on a mission right now, and Mark jumped in to help. So absolutely love it. Love having you back. Wonderful. All right, so let's jump right into this introduction here, and we'll get into the story and find out what's going on. So Cheryl is a leading advocate for military to civilian career transitions, leveraging over 2 decades of HR experience as a corporate recruiter and workforce development specialist. As the author of Civilian Mission, the 3-year guide to military professionals planning civilian careers. Sorry, can't read this morning. And host of the Military to Civilian Career Transition Power Hour podcast, Cheryl provides invaluable insight and support to veterans and military spouses. Her work focuses on reshaping career trajectories, offering strategic advice, and championing the integration of military talent into the civilian workforce. She is also a Workforce Development Councilwoman for the state of Hawaii for the term 2022 to 2026. That is a whole lot you got going on, Cheryl. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I feel tired when I hear my bio, but thank you so much for that warm and welcome. And it's such a pleasure to see you. I had you, Sean, on my podcast, and I've been waiting to be on yours because yours was one of the first podcasts rather that I listened to as I was culminating, who's in the space, what are they doing, how might I do this differently? And you really shone a light for me on that path. So thank you so much.
That's weird to hear.
It
is beautiful.
I'm a fan.
It is beautiful. Thank you so much for the kind words. And from the day we started this, Mark, we wanted to educate and help people. And, we're at that point now where we're actually starting to receive messages as well saying that, hey, I watched your show. It helped me. And that's what it's all about. And we just absolutely love doing it. So you had this career in HR, right?
Yep.
What made you decide that you wanted to help veterans? How did that journey happen? How did you get to doing this?
Sure. So I was moved in 2017 to the beautiful state of Hawaii by a big defense contractor. They wanted me to help integrate my work into this entire AOR. So the Indo-Pacific AOR, for those of you who speak military speak, is the largest area of responsibility for the military. And it has the most threats. It has the most water, the most people. And of course, we have China and Russia that we're dealing with. So in importance level, for me, I kind of knew head start that this was something that this was a mission for me. Even as a civilian going in as a government contractor and a recruiter on the corporate side, I was helping staff the military in these essential missions. And because of that, I met hundreds, if not thousands, of people who were leaving the military, either wanting to come back to Hawaii or wanting to stay. And that's when I started seeing Sean and Mark. I started seeing a lot of parallels. I saw, as we all know, the inability for them to negotiate a salary. We would have these wonderful conversations. I'm the recruiter. I'm representing this big, fabulous, big old company that is, wants nothing more than to put them to work. And they go through this beautiful interview, and then I get to the salary expectations, and they just stop. They didn't know how to unlock their worth. They didn't know how even to bridge that conversation. And, I felt bad on many of them where they'd say, I just don't know. So that concerned me. I saw this over and over to the point where when somebody was coming out of the military and they knew how to negotiate, I kind of looked at him sideways like, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" Because none of you know how to negotiate. You've not negotiated anything. The more I dug into this, the more I saw other parallels. Their loss of community, their lack of agency, really not knowing, and everyone talks about this, how to talk about their skills in more of a corporate setting. So, I got involved and I created a salary negotiation workshop at Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam. They hosted me. We had 45 people in the room,
Right.
all male, female. It was originally created as a women's negotiation. The base commander called and said, "We need to make this for everybody." And now I know why. So 45 people, male spouses, active duty, transitioning, all the whole kit and caboodle. And it went for 4 hours. And the feedback I got in the survey was, it could have lasted longer. I want to do it again. So I handed this class over to the TAPS folks, and they integrated into their training. They don't do my training exactly, but I thought, wow, this is just a well that you can keep filling up with water.
Mhm.
And how might I do this differently? So I started researching like your podcast, Lori Norris's podcast, and wanting to get back into broadcasting, which was my first career. And everyone's like, "Oh, you've got this great voice, Cheryl. You should be a podcaster." I'm like, everybody has a podcast. What am I going to do that's different?
Right.
So that's when I created the Power Hour, showing the transgression or the journey of people going from active duty into the civilian workforce, 1 to 4 years, 5+ years, and then in each episode, we feature an expert, someone who really can give back to this community and offer tips and tricks. I wanted people to leave that Power Hour and have something that they could put to use that day.
That's absolutely an amazing journey, first of all. Because most people that I know that go to Hawaii are too busy on the beach to worry about doing anything else.
I
Um,
do that too.
but no, that's not only the approach you took, but then the format of your show is really just genius, And I know when we talked, I think I caught you off guard when I hadn't even been out a year yet. And I don't think you were reaching out to me initially to be that first phase person, but I just passed a year.
Mhm.
And the beauty of it, Mark, you and I started this 6 months into my transition, and it was huge for my transition.
Yeah.
Because I heard all those horror stories, learned what not to do, and I learned about great organizations along the way.
Mhm.
But the way you approach it, Cheryl, is just phenomenal. I really like
Thank
the
you.
fact that you have the different phases, because as people know, especially as they progress through, past their military career, we continue to have these transitions that we go through. Your first job may not be your last job. You may have 4 or 5 jobs, whatever the case may be. And you're providing those different insights, and that's a really cool way to do it.
Thank you. And another thing that happened, I was at an ETAPS presentation. I was there as a company representative, as a corporate recruiter, on a panel of probably 8 or 10 people, also from Hawaii. And then somebody had been flown in. This is a story I talk a lot about on podcasts, but I'll tell you, one of the reasons I think that transition stories from average, everyday Jane, Joe, whoever is important is that the base commander had asked one of his friends to come speak at this transition class. And this person had been out so long, Sean, he had forgotten where the base gate was. So here's this guy in a suit. And in Hawaii, if you're wearing a suit, you're from DC, obviously. You're not from Hawaii. You've not changed into aloha wear. We all know you're from somewhere else. So if you're not wearing a military uniform, if you're wearing a suit, you're a suit. They call them suits. So here's this suit sitting there telling his story, not really recalling a whole bunch of his duty there at Hickam. He was in the Air Force, but talking about how grand his life was, how much money he made 20 plus years after being in the military. And I looked at my colleague and I said, who had only been out 1 year and had sat in the same ETAPS class and then went to the company I worked at. And I said, this isn't the story they need to hear. And he said, you're absolutely right, because they're all thinking they're going to make $500,000 and they're probably not going to make that in the first year. So unless you rob a bank, right, or do something illegal, I'm not saying that's not, go into VC, venture capital. It's very possible to make $500,000. But the reality was, and I saw these folks in this class, Sean, it was remarkable, writing notes. Like if they didn't capture every word that this person said, they were going to miss something. They were not going to pass the test. And I thought, wow, I just really want to bring more voices that they need to hear. Somebody who's only been out a year, or maybe 1 to 4 years or 5 years. And that's when the seed was planted, to bring just everyday stories. So as of this recording, I'm pleased to say I've recorded 100 people.
Nice.
So that I hit my goal. So now I'm trying to figure out what I do next. So maybe you guys can help me.
That's amazing. And thank you for sharing that story too, because it's not only that, and it's, I think the disconnect that some people have maybe with some of their past. Like, look, I mean, I'm not a retiree. I served my 4 years. But the other side of it is the civilian sector doesn't understand a lot still, even though there's more awareness about military transitioning members and the needs there. The psychological and PTSD, traumatic needs that have to be addressed. But there's also, I think, a lack of empathy and maybe emotional intelligence. And I see this more, please don't be offended, on the corporate recruiter side, right? Because, and it's just a dichotomy of agency, maybe recruiter, headhunter versus corporate recruiter, right? One's working for a salary, one's eating what they kill. So that's certainly, I think, a big issue that we need to address as well. Is that if a company, maybe like in your historical background, a big company is giving lip service about helping veterans, helping this community, we need to make sure that they're getting the appropriate resources and training to be able to do so. Right. And to help equip those people, because otherwise it's just lip service and they're just kind of sitting on their hands, collecting their paycheck. So, but I love the structure too of your testimonies, your interviews, the way that you kind of structure them and lay that out to tell that story, have them be able to tell their story and be effective at it. What do you see as far as like, the next chapter? You've got your book, and we'd like to hear a little bit more about your book.
Sure.
But what do you see as far as like, you said you're ready for that next step. What do you have a vision for?
Well, as of this recording, I have joined an executive search firm, and this is a boutique firm here in Hawaii. They are very well established, and I was absolutely honored that they would ask me to join. And I think it's because I am looking at talent in a different way. And with 20 plus years of experience, it sort of makes sense to go into either retained search or contingent search, where a company is coming and saying, we have the C-level person that we're looking for. And our recruiting staff is really looking for those mid-managers or those everyday folks. Banks are really big at hiring executive search firms because they need tellers. They need so much staff. So it's exclusive searching. It's a one-on-one conversation with people. And they mentioned, we really like what you're doing in the military space. The military spouse, the military affiliated community, the families, people and corporations, and we're preaching to the choir, anyone listening to this. But if there happens to be a CHRO or an HR specialist listening, the companies don't really understand. If you put it on your website as part of your cultural core values, you serve veterans, you serve the military affiliated community, you really have to do something different. And it's a different approach. It's a different conversation. It's a different onboarding even. And I've stood in front of hospitality groups here in Hawaii and absolutely stunned them with the unemployment rates for military spouses, 21%. And it hasn't changed in years more. It's like I look at this historically as a workforce development nerd, and I think to myself, certainly with all of this hoopla, the White House is on board, Blue Star Families hiring our heroes, all these companies and these nonprofits and this, the freaking government is behind this, portability laws. We're still at 21% unemployment.
And
And
is that sorry to interrupt, but is that 21%? Is that the who we know of, right? The unemployment claims,
you're absolutely right.
right? So
So
it's higher.
we know it's higher here in Hawaii because they don't, check the box. You're right, absolutely. But having the conversation that, you need to approach this group of people in a different way, it's exciting for me. And when I get excited, I could spread enthusiasm because enthusiasm's free, right? So, but it's amazing to me the stigma. So Hawaii is the fourth largest concentration of military for the US. And they've been here for a long time, but employers are just like, I just don't really want somebody here for a couple of years. I'm like, you can't staff anybody. Would you rather have someone for 2 or 3 years or no one? Empty seats or heartbeats? What do you want? So, it's frustrating for me as a professional. Now, as an executive search person, I can go and have very specific one-on-one conversations. I'm not filling 84 roles. I'm filling 1 or 5. And I can bring those military spouses. I can bring those retirees, those folks who have gone and spent 25 years in healthcare to a hospital and say, this is how this parallels. So it's been a wonderful education for me as a corporate recruiter and now executive recruiter. I have to tell you, if I didn't have that time, if I didn't write this book, I would not have the capacity to have these conversations and really advocate for these candidates, even if it might be 1 to 5 a year. It's certainly not everybody I talk to, but it's empowering. My next step, you asked, is another book. And I'm focusing my efforts on salary negotiation. And I think what I'm going to do differently is reach out to people like yourself, just like I've been doing with these transition stories, and talk about how they maybe didn't have that agency. They didn't really have the knowledge, but how they gained it and what steps they took. So again, we might, instead of just going for I could call Chris Voss, former FBI. He talks about negotiation all the time. He's a lovely man. I've been to his workshops, but every book has Chris Voss. No offense, Chris, but every book has someone like that. They have the experts on negotiation. And if you Google negotiation, everything tells you what you're doing is wrong. And that has always driven me a little crazy. So I think what I want to do is tell a little bit more of the story of how someone got from I don't know, which is truly one of the strongest things you can say. Don't say it to a corporate recruiter. You might get taken advantage of. But to not know, to knowing, and what that looks like. So that's my next step.
Very cool. Yeah, and a much needed one too. I mean, I work with a lot of career transition folks here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and across the country, and that's probably one of the biggest questions out there. How do I negotiate my salary?
Yeah, you guys walk into a room, you see it on the lapel, you see it, between the buttons, this area here, you see it on their chest. Everyone knows the pay grade. I had a transitioning service member say to me, I was stunned that so-and-so who I worked with 5 years ago was working at a company. He had forgotten all the pay grades. He should have known what I was making. And I thought to myself, well, that's a lot. That's a lot that you're putting onto that person to remember, because now they have to remember so much now because they're in this whole other landscape. And I think that's also what I saw when I was writing my first book, Civilian Mission. I was hearing stories, and Sean, I think we talked about this, I'm jumping off a cliff. I'm going into the great abyss. There was these really big fear scenarios that people were talking about, leaving this enculturated, this very predictive career environment into the great unknown. So again, let's build bridges just like you guys are doing. I want to build a bridge. I don't think it's that complicated, but then again, I didn't serve 25 years in the military. I don't know what it's like to lose that and be remade into someone else's version and then have to be thrown out and completely remake yourself again. That's a journey in of itself for sure.
So you stated earlier that you met your goal, your initial goal,
Mm-hmm.
to interview 100 people. You may not have specific goals yet, but what are some of the things that you're thinking about, um, potentially as a goal for your transition power hour? Like in your mind, like what kind of things are the next logical steps?
I really love the stories. I don't know if I'll be putting 4 people into a power hour episode. I don't know, and you know this because you can see all the YouTube analytics. You can see Buzzsprout. I don't know what portals you use, but those are the 2 I use. So I can see, even from Apple has great analytics, who's tuning in, what, where. I'm thrilled to know that, I have a global audience. This isn't just the US mainland or Hawaii where my friends live. It's not just my family members. I can say, oh, North Carolina, that must be my sister. But there's Germany, there's Africa. And I'm like, oh, there's Yurcon and there's Africon and there's Southcon and Northcon and Norcon, and I can't say them. But, we have all of the service, but it's not. It is, and I look at the demographics and I'm thinking, wow, these are people who are obviously retired too. So they're listening because maybe they haven't figured it out. So maybe focusing less on the transitioning part to maybe location. I'm open. I'm open, Sean. You're full of ideas. Mark, I've never met you before, but you seem like a pretty creative fella. Maybe you have some ideas for me.
I've
I'm
been
open.
told I'm full of something.
You're funny.
So I have a good idea every once in a while, and I make sure everybody knows it.
Well, you're a great advocate, and I really, really appreciate being on the show. This is quite an honor.
I think that there are a lot of merits to what you've already done, obviously, and I love the salary negotiation. I do think that there are some additional things that are lacking. Everybody used to talk about, and I actually I was laughing because I was going to slide over and maybe grab it, but my tap book, right, was like this big.
Yep.
It was like this big. That's how much information I got about transition when I got out in '99. And so, I think that's probably a suggestion, is being able to expand upon, okay, the old mantra like, oh, well, military members have a hard time transitioning because they use so much military jargon and acronyms, right?
Mhm.
And that's just really almost a cliche at this point in time, I think.
Yeah.
Because everybody's talked about that as being one of the primary issues. Well, I don't know that that's the primary issue anymore. And so maybe looking at, and you probably already are hearing this through your stories that you've recorded, what some of these other difficulties are aside from like selling negotiation. And that might be a question for you: is what do you think might be the next prevalent need?
I think, again, you guys hit a lot of it. The emotional aspect, and I am not a clinical I'm a recruiter. I'm just a connector. I get so energized by making a connection for a client and for a candidate. That's really where that's my game. That's my what's that? That's my jam.
That's your jam.
That's my jam. And it is a bit of a game, by the way. It's like putting a big puzzle together. But I've really admire some of the other podcasts out there. John McCaskill has one, Men Talking Mindfulness. The 2 guys, Kevin Seif and Greg Van Dyne, are doing on entrepreneurship, and they cover a lot there. The special operators especially are very, very focused on PTS, PTSD. I've learned new terms: PTSG, growth, PTSI, injury. And I've had trauma specialists. Laurel Weirs was on my show. She was outstanding. I've had branding experts. And every time I talk to these folks, you probably do the same thing. I'm like, oh, I could do a whole series on that, because it's 25, 30 minutes is just not a lot of time. No. It's enough to get them engaged, right? And maybe go off to this person's website and go engage with them. But it really doesn't do a very big, deep dive. So yeah, I'm like I said, guys, I'm open. Hawaii, I will say this, because I live in Hawaii and your audience is global too. people are leaving the state at record numbers. We're in the top 3 for cost of living. So as an executive recruiter, this is always like hunting for me. Who went to Punahou, who went to Iolani, who went to these beautiful schools and public school too. I'm a public school girl. I went to school in Las Vegas. But, who wants to come home? Who wants to come back? Who went to the mainland to get all this experience and who wants to come back? Or why aren't they? Sitting in workforce development as a councilwoman, I have a very unusual position. It's sort of my civic duty to do this, but now I get to mold it into a job. And when I do, and I did this on the corporate side too, when I do get to bring someone back, or if I find out someone is coming back because they miss home, or they want to be with their parents, or they want to just get away from the craziness that's going on the US mainland, it feels good. Like I got them a job. I'm getting them something that will create revenue for our state, for our economy. And this is the conversation I think we're all having in workforce development, especially on the military side with our governor. Josh Green is very open to this. Our Lieutenant Governor, Sylvia Luke, also, how might we keep the 10,000 or so people that are transitioning after service, not PCSing to another duty station, but could stay, that lived here for 3 years? How do we keep them for a year? How do we incentivize them to stay for 2, 3? Is it, free college? What is it? What is that secret sauce? So we're looking at other states. Wisconsin is absolutely, the great state of Wisconsin is great. Florida is great. Texas is great. What are they doing to keep veterans or bring them back? So that's probably what I'll be working on next. That sounds really boring, but
well, I think you hit one of the biggest nails on the head, and that's the cost of living. Because I was never stationed in Hawaii, but I've heard about the Hawaii BAH, and that was significant. So, I mean, honestly, the states you named off, the cost of living is a whole lot less.
It is.
So
It is.
that
And
may be
quality
your
of
factor.
life higher too. Sorry, Sean, I didn't mean to talk over you.
Nice.
But it really is. People think about cost of living. You're living in paradise. Hawaii is beautiful, absolutely magnificent. The people are wonderful. I wouldn't live anywhere else. And it is a challenge for me to live here and live comfortably, but I'm up for it, right? If I didn't have the fire in the belly that I did, or if I had family that was calling me back to, say, my home in Las Vegas or where I used to live in Los Angeles, I just brought everyone here. I brought my family to me. I have a couple strays that are in other states, but I wanted to make sure that I was surrounded with people I love. I've got great friends, and all of this is part of the conversation when I talk to candidates, of course, that want to come back, or some people who have served and want to come back. This was a big draw for us when I was doing defense contracting recruiting, is that they had served in the AOR. So I'll speak your language. And they really loved the fact that they worked so hard or they worked differently, because there was a lack, for many years, there was a lack of funds. The Pacific Initiative, Deterrence Initiative, put a lot of money into this AOR about 4 years ago. And the war in Ukraine has taken a bit of that, but they're really putting money and resources into the Indo-Pacific finally. And what this means is if you've served here and want to come back, again, I know that that's not as uncomplicated as I think it is, but they want to come back and serve as a contractor. And it was pretty easy. And when you work for a firm that will relocate you and then repatriate you is what they do, it makes it almost a yes. That I rarely got people that said no. So did a lot of relocating for sure.
Oh, that's part of the whole job. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's fantastic. And like you also alluded to earlier, 30 minutes flies by. Mark, we're already down to time.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I just can't believe this. This whole recording session has gone just way too fast. So, Cheryl, just amazing work you're doing. I love that, even though you haven't served, you feel compelled to give back in this way. And I just wish most Americans would feel that same way, right? I mean, I think a lot do, but like I always use the story, like I wasn't even born here. Like I was born in Seoul, right?
Mm-hmm.
and adopted, and had the fortunate blessing of being able to grow up in the United States and give back to my
Right.
country, right? And so I commend you for what you're doing, just helping the community, trying to make as large as impact as you can, and you are for sure. So thank you for joining us. As always, what's the best way to reach out to you? I know you've got your LinkedIn information scrolling across the bottom there.
You bet.
Your website, anything else that you want to plug?
I just want to say thank you both for what you do with this podcast, with what you do in your lives, and how you reach out to our community. When I met Sean, like you said, I was stunned that he'd only been out just a short while and that he had pre-gamed this. And I want to say, as my last alibi, if you have an opportunity to really get ahead of your transition, which is why I wrote a book that you should start 3 years in advance. That was actually the person that wrote my introduction, Chase Hughes. He's very popular. He's on the behavior panel. They just got picked up by Merritt Street Media, which is Dr. Phil McGraw's channel. He said to me, he spent 20 years in the Navy. Man, I wish I could get these folks at 3 years, and it planted the seed. And I know it sounds like it's a lot, but if you take the guide, it's really not a book. It's not going to bore you to tears. It's something you keep for 3 years, and you work on these 10 exercises over the course of 10, of the 3 years, hopefully, that you're transitioning. Or if you're transitioning and you're turning the bend and you're like, what do I do? That's fine too. You can flip through and find exercises that are valuable. But I just want to say thanks, you guys. It's really an honor to be here. And I look forward to seeing where this goes. And I appreciate your support of what I'm doing. Thank you. And as they say in Hawaii, mahalo. Mahalo nui loa.
Thank you for that too. Well, on behalf of the VET S.O.S family, thank you, Cheryl. We'd like to thank everyone else for joining us today, our viewer audience. Make sure that you follow and subscribe to us on YouTube and or your favorite podcast platforms. Remember, don't drown in the sea of transition. Grab the VET S.O.S Lifeline.